Okay, we're going to be looking at the cognitive process of memory through the multi-store model. The multi-store model is quite a simplified basic model that is used to look at memory as kind of like a computer processing system where you have an input and an output, but the multi-store model is pretty effective at explaining very simple processes. So the multi-store model has 3 stores of memory, and you can only move from one through the other in a chronological fashion, and you can't skip models. So we're going to start off with sensory memory. Sensory memory is how we take in everything around us, around the world, and process it very quickly, maybe for a fraction of a second, before either taking it into a short-term memory or letting the memory go. So sensory memory is anything from the tactile touch of your hands against an object, or hearing people around you, or the scent of something, or I don't know, just seeing things around you. And your memory has a very large capacity because you're constantly processing the world around you and forming new memories. It's just that most of these memories don't stick because they're not really that relevant to you. But there is an unlimited capacity of sensory memory. So those memories that you do take on, they're moved on into the short-term memory store, which stay there for about plus or minus 30 seconds. So not a very long time, but a lot more than your sensory memory. Short-term memory is most effective when it's acoustically encoded into your brain. So an example would be when someone gives you a phone number on the spot and you're going from the time where they tell you to the time where you open your phone and put that number in. The most effective way of putting that number into your brain and into your phone is to repeat those chain of numbers again and again until you can put them into your phone. So there's a limited amount of short-term memory because there's only so much that your brain can handle at once, and your short-term memory can be increased by rehearsal. So one really cool thing about short-term memory is Miller's magic number, which is basically something along the lines of you can only remember up to 7 plus or minus 2 items in your short-term memory at once. And this can be anything up to like units of things or numbers. And he also found that when you chunk large chunks of information into groups of things, you're able to increase the amount of items that you can remember. So the only way that your short-term memory moves into your long-term memory is through elaborative rehearsal. And the difference between long-term memory and short-term memory is that because short-term memory is acoustically encoded, it holds a very faint understanding in your head, whereas long-term memory is semantically coded. You actually have to associate a certain meaning behind something in order to remember and retain that information. So long-term memory goes through elaborative rehearsal, where you really dig into that subject or information and embed it into your long-term memory. And in order to keep it there, you have to constantly be looking at it, which means that the memory can be retained for an extended time period. There's also an unlimited capacity of long-term memory. So when we want to take information from our long-term memory and move it back into our short-term memory, that is a process called retrieval. But there are some things that can stop retrieval. There is memory decay, where maybe the biological process doesn't work as well because some structures in your brain don't work as well, and this generally happens with age. Interference, because lots of memories can actually end up being really similar, and your brain could start getting confused with which elements are part of which memory. And then retrieval failure, which is when there are not enough cues in a story to bring that memory back. So if we look at a very visual model of this model, the 3 stores: sensory, into short-term, into long-term. For short-term memory to retain in short-term memory, there needs to be a rehearsal. For it to move into long-term memory, there needs to be elaborate rehearsal. And then to take it back from long-term to short-term is retrieval. And then in each part of your memory stores, there could be an element of decay if you're not focused, or you just lose the memory, or you just don't recognize it as important enough that you have to keep. So an application of this is studying. Sometimes we study for long periods of times to try and move that information into our long-term memory storage, whereas sometimes right before a test, you'll look at it again to refresh your short-term memory and keep that information there for really immediate use. In terms of active recall, that is the trick to keep maintain information in your long-term memory, which is a study tip that a lot of students use. So that is the multi-store model of memory.